Israeli aggression, Ukrainian sovereignty, and American meddling. A former ambassador proposed that the Arab world unite in opposition to Israel and Palestine at a recent BCIS seminar. He said the United Nations was to blame for the lack of action to calm the situation down, and that both Joe Biden and Benjamin Netanyahu are trying to use the crisis to garner support in the run-up to next year's elections. Support for Israel has shifted the United States' attention. Every other factor, even those pertaining to human rights, has been given secondary importance. Only a front in the global south, specifically the Middle East, will suffice, considering the U.S.'s obsession with supporting Israel and its denial of Palestinian rights and the genocide being plotted against them. To put it mildly, American involvement in the current conflict has been counterproductive, and at worst, it has provoked further violence. As Israel readies itself for a ground invasion of the Gaza Strip, nearly 3,000 Palestinian children have been killed. After the invasion of Gaza, defense officials have publicly said that they will not be held accountable for any casualties that may occur. Everyone, regardless of their role in the current bloodshed, is effectively the target of this proclamation of war. The United States, meanwhile, is embroiled in a verbal spat with Russia and Brazil over a UN resolution. It vetoed Brazil's resolution because it failed to recognize Israel's right to self-defense. That is to say, the safety of a nuclear power is more important to the United States than the lives of the millions of people confined in a contemporary concentration camp. The result is a rapid shift towards multipolarity and a decline in Western dominance. As a result, American dominance in the West has diminished. There has been less outspoken support for Israel from other Western nations, particularly in Europe. One example is the demand for Europe to cut ties with Israel made by the acting social rights minister of Spain. France was against EU demands to cut off funding for Palestine, even though Germany and France have essentially outlawed any language that supports the Palestinian cause. The absence of agreement in the EU has given voice to opposition to officials like Ursula von der Leyen, who tweets contradictory statements on a daily basis. There appears to be more acceptance of Palestinian rights in Europe than in the United States. The United States political establishment adhered to the principle of realpolitik, that power must be used with cool, calculated reason and discretion, even when it was at the peak of its power during the Cold War. We can no longer rely on that principle. The United States has foolishly entered the Middle East and is now siding with a nuclear power that has disregarded international law. Despite its own pledge to do the same, its strategic competitors have grown stronger as a result, which is hardly surprising. When Russia and China invaded Ukraine, it brought them together. When violence broke out in Palestine, it brought the global South, China, and Russia even closer together. Given this context, and in an effort to rationalize its support for Israel, the U.S. is now implying that Vladimir Putin and Hamas are identical. Not only that, but even prominent Western journals such as The Economist and Foreign Policy have expressed strong disagreement with this perspective. For example, Howard French warns of the dangers of taking a firm stance in support of Israel in an article he wrote for Foreign Policy. However, it is more challenging to justify the unequal treatment of approximately 7 million Palestinians by Israeli authorities, many of whom are confined in areas like Gaza or occupy fragmented sections of land in the West Bank that are constantly threatened by Israeli settlement expansion, as being compatible with principles of democracy or even close to equity. But this won't stop the United States from treating Hamas the same way it treats Putin. No one in the global South will ever see things that way. The idea that a small state like Ukraine was fighting off the advances of a big settler colonizer could be used to justify Western support for the country, which has cost the U.S. over $75 billion so far. Sure enough, the global South also didn't buy that story. They saw the invasion of Ukraine as a meaningless proxy war between strategic enemies. The fact that Western officials and journalists made racist comments about Ukrainian refugees, calling them civilized, us, and not from a developing, third world nation, did not help matters. This is one reason why Palestinian refugees are geographically closer to countries in the global South than their Ukrainian counterparts. They strike a deeper chord, even in the United States, where opinions on the wars with Putin and Hamas differ significantly. Biden's words do not ring true. Israel has the support of both major parties. Donald Trump's presidency exemplifies the Republican Party's unwavering support for it. On the other hand, Republicans have had a tough time approving of Ukraine. Disagreements over whether the United States should maintain its support for the Ukrainian resistance led to Kevin McCarthy's resignation as Speaker of the House. Ukraine is running short on funding, even though one Republican presidential candidate has spoken out against it. When it comes to supporting Ukraine, Republicans have been hesitant or outright unwilling, but they have been adamant in their defense of Israel. This is in keeping with their new foreign policy, which has become increasingly isolationist, interventionist, and focused on protecting proxies since the Tea Party movement in 2009. A lack of understanding of the situation is evident in the U.S. political establishment's incapacity to distinguish between these two conflicts. There has been a dramatic change in global sentiment toward the countries of the Global South, which include not only Asia but also Africa and stretch from Russia to China. The United States sided with China in reaction to the Soviet Union's aggression. As a result, it was able to isolate Russia and meet its demise within 20 years. Nevertheless, this kind of realism is absent in modern times. These days, it won't stop trying to force its viewpoint on everyone, regardless of whether they share it or not. Furthermore, no hegemonic power can effectively manage two warfronts simultaneously. By treating them as interchangeable, no dominant power can achieve victory. America still doesn't get it. You can reach the writer at they are a freelance columnist, researcher, and expert in international relations.